I had barely stepped into the aisle when Brian's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp enough to stop the room. "She's just here for the money." Dad was going to cut her off. Heads turned. Whispers rose. Heat climbed my neck, but I stood still, refusing to shrink for him. Then the doors opened and the family lawyer walked in holding a small USB drive. Conversations died. Breath stalled because whatever was on that drive wasn't part of the ceremony. "My name is Emma Harrison, and before that day in the church I used to believe grief softened people. I thought loss pulled families closer, reminded them of what mattered. But standing there beneath the stained glass windows, listening to Brian rewrite my entire existence in one sentence, I realized I had been wrong for a long time. It wasn't always like this between us. When I was little, Dad woke me before sunrise on Saturdays, whispering, 'Grab your boots, kiddo.' We drove toward the water with the windows cracked just enough to let in the smell of salt. He taught me how to tie a line, how to wait without getting restless, how to listen to the quiet. Those mornings felt like the safest place in the world. Sometimes he'd lift me onto the dock and say, 'You see the horizon? That's how far you get to dream.' I believed him. But things changed when I chose art over the business path he had planned. I still remember the way his shoulders tensed when I told him I'd accepted a spot at an art school instead of studying finance. He didn't yell. Dad almost never yelled. He just went quiet in that way that made the walls feel cold. Brian filled the silence for him. "She'll grow out of it," he'd tell relatives, smiling like he was doing me a favor. "It's just a phase." Except it wasn't. As I got older, the distance between Dad and me didn't feel accidental anymore. Calls went unanswered. Messages disappeared into nothing. I'd send him photos of my work, paintings inspired by the skyline he'd helped build in Seattle, and sometimes weeks passed without a reply. I told myself he was busy, that he didn't mean it, that we'd fix it later. But later kept slipping away. Moving to Los Angeles only made things blurrier. I tried to visit when I could, but the few times I showed up, Brian always seemed to be in the middle of a conversation with Dad about some deal or expansion. They'd pause when I walked in, their energy shifting. Brian would clap my shoulder just a little too hard. "Still playing with paint," he'd joke. Everyone laughed except Dad, who just gave me that polite smile strangers give in elevators. By the time Dad's health began to falter, I didn't even know. No one told me. I found out from a distant cousin who assumed I already knew. When I called home, Brian answered for Dad and said he was resting, that stress wasn't good for him, and maybe I should give him space. I tried to believe that too. But sitting in that church, hearing my brother spit accusations loud enough to echo off stone, something inside me shifted. For the first time, I wondered if the distance I'd been trying to fix wasn't between me and Dad at all, but between me and the truth. I stayed in my seat after the service, letting the crowd spill past me in waves of whispered judgment. People I hadn't seen since childhood avoided my eyes, pretending to straighten jackets or adjust scarves. Brian didn't bother pretending. He stood near the front with Uncle Richard and Aunt Caroline, speaking just loud enough for his voice to carry across the hall. "She didn't visit. She didn't call. She only shows up now because there's money on the line." Each word landed with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed the narrative for years. Sarah squeezed my hand. "You don't have to stay here," she murmured. But I did. Leaving would only prove Brian right. As I watched him bask in the attention, pieces of the past I'd tried to ignore began snapping into place. The unanswered calls, the missing invitations, the time I flew home for Dad's birthday only to discover the dinner had moved without anyone telling me. I'd cried in a rental car that night, convincing myself Dad was disappointed in me, that maybe I'd pushed too hard chasing a dream he didn't understand. Now, watching Brian smirk under the soft glow of the sanctuary lights, I felt the truth tug hard. Someone had been feeding Dad a version of me that didn't exist, and that someone was standing 10 feet away, adjusting his tie like he owned the room. When the reception started, I forced myself to walk through it. People parted around me the way water moves around a stone. A board member from the family business gave me a tight smile. "Your brother handled so much these last few months," he said. "He stepped up." Stepped on was more accurate. I kept moving. At the refreshment table, Aunt Caroline approached. "It must be difficult," she said, her tone dripping with glassy sympathy. "Coming back after being gone so long." "I wasn't gone," I replied quietly. She blinked, confused. As if the version of me she'd been handed left no room for contradiction. But the worst moment came when I overheard Brian telling someone near the doorway, "Dad wanted distance." She made her choices. My breath caught. That wasn't Dad's voice. That was Brian's. Something inside me broke, not in the way things shatter, but in the way steel bends, slow, hot, irreversible. The turning point came when the family lawyer approached me. His expression held something I hadn't seen all day: sincerity. "Emma," he said softly, "there's something you should know before tomorrow. Tomorrow the will reading." For the first time since I'd stepped into the church, I felt a flicker of something that didn't hurt. Not hope exactly. More like the sense that the story Brian had been telling all these years was about to meet its first witness. I barely slept that night. The hotel room felt too quiet, too clean, like a place meant for someone whose life wasn't unraveling in slow motion. I lay awake replaying every moment of the funeral. Brian's voice cracking through the air, the sideways glances, the lawyer's unreadable expression. By dawn, exhaustion pressed behind my eyes, but my mind wouldn't stop moving. Sarah knocked just after sunrise, holding 2 coffees and wearing the sweatshirt she always traveled in. "You look like you stared at the ceiling for 8 hours straight," she said. "I did," I admitted. She sat beside me. "What did the lawyer say yesterday?" "He didn't say anything specific, just that I should prepare myself." I rubbed my temples. "I don't know what that means." "It means something's coming," she said. "And not from Brian." Her certainty grounded me more than the coffee did. By mid-morning, I forced myself to walk through the city toward my father's house, the house I hadn't set foot in for years. The cold Seattle air bit at my skin, carrying the familiar scent of winter and salt and diesel. Memories layered on top of one another like paint strokes. When I reached the front steps, I hesitated. The housekeeper let me in with a soft smile. "Your father spoke of you," she whispered. Startled me. "He did." She nodded but said nothing more. As she walked away, guilt and longing twisted inside me. Dad's study looked almost untouched. Papers stacked neatly. The same heavy wooden chair. A photo of Brian and me as kids sat on his desk, sunburned from a beach trip, grinning with ice cream melting down our arms. Beside it, a single empty space where another frame should have been. I stared at that blank spot for a long time. What had been there? Why was it gone? The quietness of the house felt like a secret breathing against the walls. Back at the hotel, Sarah sprawled across the bed, scrolling on her phone. She sat up when I walked in. "You okay?" "I don't know." I kicked off my boots. "The lawyer said he wanted to speak before the meeting." "Speak privately?" I nodded. We met in a small office on the top floor of a downtown building that afternoon. Edward Mitchell looked worn, like the last few months had carved lines he hadn't earned. "Emma," he said gently, "tomorrow will be difficult for many people in that room. But not for you." "I don't understand." He folded his hands. "Your father made changes, significant ones, and he left context. You'll see tomorrow." Every answer he gave felt like a locked door. "Edward, did my dad want distance from me?" My voice cracked despite my best effort. Did he stop caring?" He shook his head immediately. "No. Whatever you've been told about your father's feelings wasn't from him." My breath hitched. "Then why didn't he?" He raised a hand. "Tomorrow." It was the only promise he would make. That night, something inside me shifted. Not hope, not yet, but the beginning of a boundary forming. Thin as a line of pencil but real. And when I finally lay back down staring at the ceiling of that too-clean hotel room, one thought repeated itself until sleep finally came. Whatever happens tomorrow, I won't let Brian speak for me ever again. I arrived early the next morning, hoping the quiet hallways would steady me. They didn't. My heart thudded with every echoing step toward the conference room at the end of the long corridor. Brian's voice drifted through the slightly open door. Confident, loud, soaked in entitlement. Dad knew who was loyal. "Today we'll just make it official." My stomach twisted, but I forced myself inside. The room fell silent. Every seat at the long table was filled. Board members on one side, relatives on the other, Brian planted at the head like he'd already taken ownership. Uncle Richard gave me a curt nod. Aunt Caroline didn't bother hiding her disapproval. I walked to the seat farthest from Brian, the one clearly meant for me, and sat. Brian smirked. You actually showed up. Brave. I didn't answer. At precisely 10 o'clock, Edward Mitchell entered, a folder tucked under his arm. But it wasn't the folder that shifted the room. It was the small USB drive in his hand, the same one he'd carried into the church yesterday. Conversations died instantly. Everyone watched him place it on the table. What's that? Brian asked, his tone tightening. Your father insisted, Edward said calmly. We'll begin shortly. Brian leaned back, trying to regain control. Look, Edward, I know Dad wanted me to handle things. So if this is some sort of sentimental. It isn't, Edward said with a finality that surprised even me. He connected the USB to the projector. The screen at the end of the room flickered to life. Then my father's face appeared. My breath caught. He looked healthy, healthier than he had in years, wearing his navy suit, sitting in his home office, speaking directly to the camera. Hello, he said softly. If you're watching this, it means I'm no longer here. All chairs stilled. Even Brian's smug expression fell flat. I've asked Edward to play this so there is no confusion, no rewriting of my intentions. His eyes were steady, no manipulation in them. A ripple moved through the room. I want to begin with my daughter, Emma, if you're here. His gaze seemed to land on me through the screen. I'm sorry. The word hit so hard I forgot how to breathe. I'm sorry for the distance between us. For believing things I should have questioned. For letting others speak for you instead of listening to you myself. My vision blurred. But I recently learned the truth, he continued. 6 months ago, after a health scare, I began working from home. One afternoon I went into Brian's office to find some documents. There I found a drawer full of letters addressed to me. Birthday cards, invitations to your art shows, notes you sent over the years. Gasps broke around the table. Brian shot up from his chair. That's a lie. Sit down, Edward said sharply. Dad's voice pressed on. All of them hidden from me. All unopened. A shocked murmur grew louder. Uncle Richard frowned. Brian, what is he talking about? My father's face hardened. That discovery made me question more. I hired a private investigator to review communications, and what I found devastated me. Calls from Emma intercepted. Voicemails deleted. Messages returned in my name without my knowledge. A tremor ran through me. Brian's face drained of color. He was confused. His medication. Dad leaned closer to the camera. No, son. I knew exactly what I was doing. Silence snapped shut, and the investigation uncovered something even more serious. Questionable practices inside the company. Cheap materials approved for major developments, altered inspection reports, attempts to push through permits without proper oversight. Board members exchanged alarmed looks. One whispered, My God, I built this company with integrity, Dad said. And what I found forced me to reconsider everything. Brian slammed his hand on the table. This is ridiculous. Enough, Edward warned. Dad's tone softened again. Emma, I regret the time we lost. I plan to visit you to see your life in Los Angeles to make things right. But in case I didn't get the chance, I wanted you to hear this directly from me. I am proud of you, of your art, of your courage, of the life you built for yourself. My chest broke open. I covered my mouth. The tears were unstoppable. Now, Dad continued, and the room froze. As for my estate, my previous will left the majority of my assets and full control of the company to Brian, with a small trust for Emma. Brian straightened, regaining confidence. That will has been revoked. His confidence cracked instantly. This new document reflects the truth of what I learned. Dad picked up a sheet of paper. To my son Brian, I leave a monetary trust of $500,000, released in yearly portions contingent upon his cooperation with an ethics review of his conduct and completion of a business integrity program. Brian choked. This is insane. This is fraud. Edward didn't react. To my daughter Emma, Dad said, I leave my home, my personal investments, and 51% ownership of the company. She may run it, appoint leadership, or sell her shares as she chooses. Chaos erupted. Board members whispered furiously. Aunt Caroline gasped. Uncle Richard stared at Brian with something close to disgust. Dad's voice cut through the noise. Emma, I know this is a heavy responsibility, but you have the integrity this company needs. You see the world clearly without cutting corners, and I trust you. My throat tightened. Finally he leaned back. I want to say 3 words I should have said more often. The room went silent. I love you. Everything inside me collapsed and steadied all at once. He ended with one final message. Let the truth guide you, and let this company be rebuilt with honesty. The screen went black for a long moment. No one moved. Then Brian erupted. This can't stand. She doesn't know anything about the business. She's an artist. Dad was confused. Enough. A board member snapped. You hid communications. You falsified reports. Do you have any idea how serious? Brian backed away, pale now. You're all turning on me? No, I finally said, standing. My voice surprised even me. Steady, quiet, unshaken. You did that yourself. He stared at me, stunned by the shift in power. All morning he'd acted like the room belonged to him. Now everyone was watching me instead. You think you can do this? He spat. I don't have to, I replied. Dad already did. His jaw clenched. He looked around, searching for an ally, but every face was stone. For the first time in my life, Brian looked small. Edward closed the folder. We'll proceed with the formal documents now. Brian stormed out the door, slamming it so hard the glass rattled. No one went after him. The room stayed in stunned silence until someone finally said, Emma, congratulations. I didn't feel victorious, not yet. Just steady. Like for the first time in years, the story was finally mine again. In the days that followed, everything moved in fragments. Meetings, signatures, hushed conversations in hallways. But beneath all the motion was a strange stillness, like the world had shifted an inch to the left and I was the only one who noticed. Edward walked me through the transition with a gentleness I didn't expect. Your father thought this through, he kept saying. He wanted you to have clarity, not chaos. Clarity felt foreign after so many years of doubt. Moving into Dad's house was harder than I imagined. The rooms felt familiar and wrong at the same time. His jacket still hung by the door. A mug sat in the kitchen sink as if he'd meant to rinse it after one more cup of coffee. I stood in the quiet living room, letting the weight of everything press into me. Grief and relief tangled in a way I couldn't separate. In his study I found a small envelope tucked inside his desk drawer, my name written in his handwriting. Inside was a short note, barely a paragraph, but enough to undo me. He wrote that he'd followed my exhibitions from afar, that he admired the way I saw the world, that he wished he'd told me sooner. I read it 3 times before I could breathe properly again. At the company, reactions were mixed. Some employees avoided eye contact, unsure how to treat the artist's daughter suddenly holding majority ownership. Others quietly dropped by my new office to say they were relieved there would be changes, real ones rooted in the values my father had built everything on. As for Brian, I heard he'd left Seattle for a while. No forwarding address, no apology. And strangely, I didn't feel anger. Just an open road where something new could begin. Standing on the back porch of my father's house, I watched the winter light fade across the yard we once built snowmen in. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Dad's truth had finally broken through every lie, every distance Brian tried to create. And what remained was something simple. My life was mine again. The company, the house, the legacy, they were responsibilities, yes, but also a chance to rebuild with honesty at the center. If you've ever fought your way back to the truth, share your story below and subscribe for more.